So, hello everyone. First of all, I would like to apologize for my voice, but Athens, it's a very hot place right now, and the air conditions work like mad, and this affects my voice every time, every year by this time.
Oh, yes. No, it's not. So this, no.
No,
This.
this one.
You need to just flip this to yourself
Okay.
so that your voice will be recorded properly for the Zoom and for the recording. So there you go.
Can I put that in my pocket?
I think so. We'll just flip it to yourself.
Can you hear me better now?
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So, since I've been working on McDowell's work and the thesis on Feuerbach a few years ago, I was very impressed and thrilled and amazed that there is a conference with this title, Marxism and the Pittsburgh School, because I thought that I was maybe alone that I could think of this conversation, but I'm very happy that there is this conference, and I'm very thankful to the organizing committee for making it real and for having me, of course. Now, I decided to read my paper in order to confine myself within the time limits, but I have made a very rich presentation so you can follow my reading. Okay. In the present paper, I will focus on the normative problem from a very specific standpoint. I will treat the normative problem as a problem of explanatory genuineness. From this standpoint, the crucial question is the following. Should we take normative explanation to be a genuine kind of explanation, or we should understand them as merely provisional forms of intelligibility which need to be reduced to the legitimate explanatory patterns of the empirical sciences? This is, I take it, the way that John McDowell understands the normative problem when he says, the problem posed by the contrast between the space of reasons and the realm of law in the context of naturalism that conceives nature as the realm of law is not ontological, but ideological. Normative explanations makes things intelligible by showing how they conform to norms. For instance, if someone asks why I believe Q, I could reply that I believe P, and I also believe that if P, then Q. I can explain my belief modification by subsuming it under the epistemic norm of modus ponens. Accordingly, if someone asks me why I help a stranger to find her way home, I can reply that helping her is an expression of solidarity, and solidarity is something good. I can explain my action by subsuming it under a practical norm. Empirical scientific explanations, on the other hand, make things intelligible in a quite different way. They show how they fit in the causal order described by the empirical sciences. These are the cases where I explain someone's belief or action by referring to various psychological or sociological factors that cause the belief or action in question. When I explain things in the one way or the other, it is indifferent whether I refer to myself or to another person. I can use both kinds of explanation for either myself or for another person. What matters for my case is that normative and empirical scientific explanation have a distinct logical form. From this standpoint, we can express the normative problem in terms of the following dilemma. Either normative explanations are not genuine, and thus they can and should altogether be reduced to the domain of empirical scientific explanations, which is scientific naturalist programmatic claim, or normative explanations are sui generis and therefore cannot be reduced to other kinds of explanation without losing valuable informational content about the world. This is the normativist claim. I suggest that McDowell naturalism of second nature and Marx's view, as expressed in the thesis on Feuerbach, stand on the same normativist side of the dilemma. Furthermore, they share a fundamental negative argument against scientific naturalism. Finally, I argue that some of the theses on Feuerbach, properly reconstructed, can overcome the impasses that face McDowell's account. My argumentation will proceed as follows. First, I will present what is common in Marx's and McDowell's view, i.e. the rejection of metaphysical empiricism. Next, I will present McDowell's notion of second nature and its problems. In the fourth and fifth sections, I will argue that some of Marx's theses on Feuerbach can provide solutions to those problems, leading to a liberal naturalist framework which reconciles autonomy and the empirical sciences. In Mind and Word, McDowell argues that the normative problem is the result of a mistaken idea widespread in modern and contemporary philosophy, which equates the realm of nature with the realm of natural law. This idea identifies the ontological territory of nature with the subject matter of empirical scientific knowledge. The eliminativist perspective of scientific naturalism is built upon this empiricist premise, i.e. that natural is coextensive with the subject matter of empirical sciences. Marx makes the same philosophical diagnosis and provides the same negative argument against scientific naturalism, or vulgar or old materialism in his terminology, in the first and fifth thesis on Feuerbach. In the first thesis, he writes, "The chief defect of all previous materialism, that of Feuerbach included, is that things, Gegenstand, reality, sensuousness, are conceived only in the form of the object, or of contemplation, or intuition, but not as sensuous human activity, practice, not subjectively." Marx explicitly recognized as the chief defect of all previous variation of naturalism that took for granted metaphysical empiricism. In other words, the previous naturalists took for granted the idea that reality or nature is equated with the subject matter of the empirical knowledge, are conceived only in the form of the object or of contemplation. This philosophical stance excludes by definition human subjectivity from reality, but not as sensuous human activity, practice, not subjectively. Thus, subjectivity was left in the philosophical jurisdiction of idealism. Furthermore, Marx charges Feuerbach with nominalism, one sensuous object really distinct from conceptual objects. The result is that the Feuerbachian perspective takes the distinctively human feature, that is rationality, as being exhausted in the theoretical attitude, i.e. knowledge or epistemic stance. Human action, on the contrary, is stripped of its normative content. By taking for granted empiricism and a fortiori nominalism, Feuerbachian naturalism leads to an eliminativist perspective on ethics. The same philosophical diagnosis about the Feuerbachian identification of naturalism and empiricism is repeated in the fifth thesis. Marx suggests that naturalism, qua naturalism, does not entail an eliminativist perspective on normativity. What leads to the programmatic elimination of the normative real is empiricism. As Sebastian Redl stresses, Marx maintains that all hitherto existing materialism failed as it conceived of material reality merely as an object of intuition, not as human activity. That is, existing materialism is flawed by being empiricist. In short, both Marx and McDowell agree that empiricist naturalism is necessarily eliminativist because it equates the realm of nature or reality with the subject matter of the empirical scientific understanding. McDowell's way of rejecting the idea that nature is identified with the subject matter of empirical scientific knowledge is to suggest that nature includes second nature. That notion of second nature can help us create the proper logical space between eliminative naturalism, bold naturalism, which makes normativity look like an illusion, and ontological dualism, rampant Platonism, which makes our capacity to respond to reason, our freedom, look like an occult power. The rejection of the assumption that the realm of nature is coextensive with the realm of natural law and the division of nature into first and second leads to a liberal naturalist conception that places normative phenomena into the wider territory of nature. The questions which arise now are these. these. Can the law-governedness be the essential feature of the mode of intelligibility which is proper to first nature and contrast the kinds of intelligibility which proper to the normative facts? Is second nature the necessary and sufficient condition of the kind of intelligibility that is proper to reason? In his later work, McDowell revises his account by taking into consideration a richer conception of natural sciences, which does not include solely mathematical physics and the explanation that is based on law-governedness. Bringing biology into his philosophical pictures makes him suggest that second nature is not a distinctive feature of human beings, and that second nature is only a necessary but not a sufficient condition for rationality. The acquisition of rationality presupposes the second nature, but second natural phenomena does not necessarily entail the existence of rationality. There are second natural phenomena that require a kind of intelligibility which is not substantially different from the intelligibility required to capture the first natural phenomena. Only a subset of the second natural phenomena is made intelligible by the placement to the space of reasons. This revision, which abandons a monolithic Russellian conception of scientific explanation, makes McDowell's account more refined and science-informed. It incorporates a richer and more accurate conception of the explanatory patterns that the natural sciences employ, without changing its principal thought. The kind of intelligibility that is a matter of placement in the space of reasons is sui generis, that is, beyond the reach of the natural scientific understanding. However, I claim that McDowell's account stops taking into consideration the lessons from the empirical sciences exactly at the point where the threat for his account is less acute. What happens if, after biology, we try to incorporate social and behavioral, or in short, human sciences into our philosophical image? Biology clearly leaves room in the set of second natural phenomena for a kind of intelligibility that is not proper to the biological explanatory patterns. If we add human science in our picture, though, no such room is left. The subject matter of the human sciences covers the entire range of human actions and beliefs. Besides, the part of the second natural phenomena that are cognitively captured by biology, no other section of second nature can, at least in principle, be ruled out by the reach of human scientific understanding. Eliminative naturalists could argue that the scientific revolution and the corresponding emergence of mathematical physics saved us from the ancient and medieval superstition that first nature is the realm of final ends. Furthermore, the emergence of biology and modern medicine exempted a part of the second nature from the kind of intelligibility which is proper to reason. And now the human sciences exempted the rest of second nature from this peculiar or supposedly sui generis kind of understanding. The more we examine reality, the more we realize that the only legitimate kind of intelligibility is the perspective of empirical science. After all, the scientific naturalist could conclude the only science-informed philosophy is this kind of naturalism which equates nature with the subject matter of the empirical science. Despite its monolithic conception of scientific explanation, and in one sense, because of it, the mindward version of McDowell's account could provide a philosophical ground for the genuine of the normative explanations. In this version, the notion of the second nature is coextensive with the domain of application of the normative explanation, and hence the genuine of the latter is secured by the existence of the former. Furthermore, the domain of normative explanation could easily be determined by the logical contradistinction with the notion of law-governedness. In the revised version on the other hand, there is no such possibility. Second nature and the domain of application of normative explanation cease to be coextensive notion. Second nature is divided into one rational and one non-rational part. One part that is the domain of reason and one which is the domain of empirical science. But then second nature cannot provide a philosophical ground for the genuineness of the normative explanation. We need a further criterion for demarcating the second natural phenomena which have to be explained by the empirical science, such as biology, from the second natural phenomena, which have to be intelligible by placing them in the space of reason. That is by providing a normative explanation. McDowell's quietist strategy consists in repeating that no philosophical worries arise if we place rationality into the realm of nature, and that the naturalism of natural science should not be taken as a default position. The default view should be that human beings are unique among living things, outside the reach of the sort of understanding achievable by scientific biology, in virtue of the freedom that belongs with our responsiveness to reasons as such, unless it can be shown to be wrong. But taking into account the human science, I think makes McDowell's naturalism of second nature more vulnerable to the bold naturalist threats and his quietist strategy less convincing. I don't see why it is self-evident that human beings are unique among living things. In this sense, I can't see how it can be convincing that there is something outside the reach of understanding which is proper to the empirical sciences. At this point, some of the theses on Feuerbach, properly reconstructed, can help us avoid the eliminativist threat by detecting and rejecting the other two fundamental premises of scientific naturalism. That is God's point of view and individualism. The viewpoint of an external observer is an indispensable precondition of the eliminativist perspective. In the third thesis, Marx points out, the materialist doctrine concerning the changing of circumstances and upbringing forgets that circumstances are changed by men and that the educator must himself be educated. This doctrine must, therefore, divide society into two parts, one of which is superior to society. The coincidence of the changing of circumstances and of human activity or self-change can be conceived and rationally understood only as a revolutionary practice. Many scholars, such as E.P. Thompson, take this thesis primarily as an indication that Marx acknowledges the existence of some creatures, human beings, that are characterized by a strange or idiosyncratic causal efficacy. And this is the ground for suggesting that Marx adopts an anti-naturalist philosophy of social science. But I don't think that this is the point here. The crucial part of this thesis is the second sentence, that this doctrine must therefore divide society into two parts, one of which is superior to society. The point is that the materialist doctrine concerning the changes of circumstances and upbringing, in other words, all previous eliminating naturalism, presupposes a division of society between those who observe, the superior part, and those who are observed. Only from the viewpoint of such division are human beings passive products of the circumstances and the received education. However, this is an external viewpoint, a standpoint which is often called God's point of view, or in Thomas Nagel's terms, view from nowhere. Presupposing God's point of view, a transcendent standpoint external to the observed society, that is an epistemically privileged standpoint, is an indispensable presupposition of eliminativist naturalism. The standpoint is external in the following sense. It is not affected by the very act of scientifically understanding society. In this sense, it can assume the elimination of normative content through the gradual explanatory reduction of the latter to the domain of empirical scientific understanding. Let me clarify this point by a very brief example. Think of someone, let's say V, who does not have sex because she thinks that premarital intercourse is morally wrong. Suppose now that someone else, let's say S, a social or behavioral scientist, studies her behavior and concludes that V's beliefs concerning premarital intercourse are the result of a set of causal, psychological, or sociological factors. This is an ordinary act of explanatory reduction. A normative attitude, this one against premarital intercourse, is explanatory reduced to the factors that cause this very attitude. The eliminativist naturalist believes that this act of explanatory reduction can be performed for every phenomenon, provisionally understood in normative terms. Hence, she believes that the normative concept is eliminable. Each and every act of making a phenomenon intelligible in normative terms can be gradually, explanatorily reduced to an act of making the same phenomenon intelligible in terms of empirical scientific understanding. To reiterate, the programmatic claim is that every aspect of this thinking and behavior can be explained in terms of empirical scientific understanding. At this point, let's think of a slightly different scenario. Let's suppose that it is not S, but V herself who realized with the aid of sociological or psychological knowledge that it was a set of causal factors which determined her attitude against premarital intercourse. In this case, the normative content concerning premarital intercourse is not eliminated. It is just modified in light of the new evidence about what brought about her previous moral convictions on premarital intercourse. The philosophical image which allows and furthermore demands the elimination of normative content presupposes an external or God's point of view which is not affected by any act of explanatory reduction of a normative fact to the network of explanation of empirical scientific understanding. I think that this is the point of Marx's remark about the division of the society into two parts, where one of them is superior. The superior part allegedly embraces God's standpoint concerning society, the standpoint of an external observer. Moreover, the point of the same thesis is that a standpoint like that is untenable, and it should not be presupposed, especially by a philosophical perspective, which takes itself as naturalistic. The empiricist viewpoint of external observers brings us to the final presupposition of eliminative naturalism, methodological individualism. Marx detects the inherently individualistic perspective of the old materialism in the 9th and the 10th theses. In those theses, Marx argues that empiricist naturalism, contemplative materialism, entails methodological individualism. In other words, empiricist naturalism cannot but conceive society as a sum total of individuals. In this view, individuals, as observable, are methodologically or epistemologically primary, while social relations are secondary. The latter are made intelligible only as derivatives of the intrinsic feature of the former. In this sense, individuals are conceived independently of their social relations. On the contrary, social relations are conceived as derivatives of the private goals of individuals. This view, in turn, entails an ahistorical conception of human nature. Both the 6th and the 7th theses stress that Feuerbach contemplative materialism is incapable of realizing that the essence of man, that is, what is distinctively human, i.e. rationality, is no abstraction inherent in each single individual. Marx objects that the essence of human being is equated with the ensemble of the social relations, and therefore individuals are shaped by the social context of each historical era. This is a clear expression of holism. In short, Marx rejects the idea that the differentia specifica of human being is something that can be determined through abstraction, that is, through the cognitive process of forming concepts by identifying common features among a group of observable individuals. It is not a property like two-footedness, for example. Furthermore, he rejects the idea that the differentia specifica is a transhistorical feature that is found in the isolated human individual. On the contrary, he takes it that what is distinctively human is transformed according to the historical transformation of the social framework. In this sense, the abstract individuals are a social product, and not vice versa. This view, which is clearly influenced by Hegelian historicism, creates the logical space for adapting a notion of normative progress in human history. History is not the succession of ethically incommensurable social frameworks, but the domain of the ongoing expansion of human rationality. Given the rejection of all three presuppositions of scientific naturalism, the empirical knowledge provided by human sciences cannot threaten our autonomy. Acts of explanatory reduction, like the one in our example, do not lead to the programmatic elimination of the space of reasons and hence of the normative relations. Let's return to this case. Acquiring sociological or psychological knowledge can reveal that her belief about premarital intercourse is not actually justified. It was only seemingly justified that premarital intercourse is morally wrong, and this belief was the effect of various sociological and psychological causes. But the possibility of empirical knowledge of those causes does not restrict her freedom nor excuse her from the reflective scrutiny of what actually constitutes a reason for acting or believing with respect to sexual behavior. On the contrary, the empirical knowledge that she acquired about herself made her freer, as it has enriched her space of reasons in an important sense. If the act of explanatory reduction is correct, her reorganized space of reasons contains a few more justificatory relations that prevent her from making a mistake about what is morally right or wrong about sexual behavior. During reflective scrutiny about what is a reason for acting in a particular way, taking into consideration the sociological or psychological knowledge about her condition can prevent her from uncritically believing that her action is justified. Thus, embracing the cognitive content of the act of reduction enriches the space of reason because it leads to what we may call the restriction of the possibility of normative error. In short, if we reject God's point of view along with metaphysical empiricism, as I claim Marx does, the social science cease to appear threatening for our freedom and consequently for our autonomy. They are, in fact, constitutive of our freedom since they can assist us in taking control of our lives by identifying the cases when we don't have control of them. If what I have already said is correct, the rejection of metaphysical empiricism, a view that both Marx and McDowell share, is a necessary but not a sufficient condition for rejecting scientific naturalism. Additionally, rejecting individualism, and especially God's point of view, is needed to avoid the eliminativist version of naturalism. Through the combined rejection of metaphysical empiricism, God's point of view, and individualism, we can arrive at a radical rejection of scientific naturalism, and consequently at a liberal version of naturalism. The perspective that follows from the reconstruction of the Marxian thesis on Feuerbach is naturalistic insofar as it leaves nothing beyond the reach of scientific understanding and presents scientific explanation as constitutive of the space of reasons. It is also liberal in the sense that it rejects the eliminability of normative vocabulary and retains the genuineness of the normative explanation. Rationality is not a mysterious power outside of nature, but the capacity to take control of our life by understanding how the causal going-ons work, that is, by gradually knowing more about the cases in which we don't have control of our lives. However, this perspective has two main philosophical consequences that are not entailed, at least immediately, by McDowell's liberal naturalist account. The first is that freedom is a concept that allows for degrees, and the second is that the layout of the space of reason is historically changeable. Thank you.
I think we can take a few minutes for questions, although we're, I think we are up for a break pretty soon. I think we do a few questions now. We can give you one.
So I'm a bit deaf, so it's okay.
So I was curious about the example you used of a woman internally coming to change her mind about her normative commitments. And I think you said, although I might have misheard, that if a social scientist external to her, thank you. If the social scientist external to her explains her behavior naturalistically, then that entails the elimination of normative explanatory power, but that if she comes to, through the same process, to alter her behavior, then that does not eliminate the normative explanation. Is that fair?
Yes, continue, and I will.
So my question is, I don't understand what that means. That
Okay.
I would have thought it was exactly the same.
Okay, from a philosophical point of view, I stress that from a philosophical point of view, it is indifferent whether or not me, myself, or another individual has access to scientific knowledge. Maybe she does, maybe she does not. But from a philosophical point of view, my point is that the access to the scientific knowledge is possible. If the access is possible, then I can be aware of this knowledge. And if I am aware of this knowledge, this can transform my space of reason in a way that I called the restriction of the possibility of normative error. So scientific naturalism take it like there is an external point of view from science that can observe us, and this does not affect our conception about what is right and wrong. But my point is that this is an unattainable God's point of view. This is an unattainable God's view from nowhere. My point is that science is part of society, and then of course there are pragmatic limitations to every people in the world to obtain the scientific knowledge. But this is indifferent from a philosophical point of view. From a philosophical point of view, what matters is that we have access in principle to this knowledge. And if we have access in principle to this knowledge can reorganize our space of reason. It does not lead to the elimination of the space of reason. We cannot present people, scientific practice is a human endeavor. We cannot present people like ants. Ants cannot have access to the scientific knowledge about them, but we can have this scientific knowledge, and this makes the whole difference. And this constitutes our rationality, in my view. Did this make it clear?
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Thodoris. It was a very fascinating presentation.
Thank you.
I just had two questions. They're quite different questions. And I'd like to ask both questions together, if that's okay.
Okay.
The first is, I'm not familiar with Brandon. I'm a complete amateur in this department, but I was wondering if he was reacting, or maybe overreacting to the reductionist tendencies in Marxism that were predominant in the sort of 70s, 80s, and 90s, of really reducing Marx to just a mechanistic thing about human nature and it's only social relations, and making that into a dogma. Would he be reacting against that to try and explain the importance of the inner thought process, a space of reason, normative ideas? Would he be, trying to counteract that? That's my first question.
What
Yeah.
is the question?
The question is, would his position have been a reaction against the dogmatization of Marxism to be reductionist and scientistic? And can I ask the second
Yeah,
question?
of course.
It's completely unrelated.
Okay, sure.
This is unrelated to the first.
Okay.
I just liked your two drawings that you had, first and second nature drawings.
Mhm.
I just thought where you had one outside and one inside with the two colors. I just thought if you could stick them up, that would be nice.
Sorry. You mean the two versions of McDowell?
Yeah, the red.
This one.
Yeah, that I thought they were very interesting and useful, but I thought the second one would be much more explanatory if within the the brown bit in the middle, the orange, the light orange bit, there you would have first nature within that as a core, because without our first nature, if you can define first nature as the existence of a material world that we live in, that we are part of, without which we would not exist, it would be within the second one. It would be within the middle of it. So there's a kind of dialectic between the
Okay,
first and the second.
I see your point. Always, I mean, this is the problem with metaphors, and images are metaphors, but you can see that as a confinement of possibility. If you see that as a confinement of possibilities, first nature confines some possibilities because of the physical and chemical laws and all this stuff. And this is the second natural phenomena that corresponds to biology, that confines other possibilities. And this is left for us to, I don't know.
But if you want to make it less hierarchical, less.
This is though McDowell's view.
Oh, I see.
This is what I
Okay.
present as the mind and world version and as the revised version. As long as the Marxist tradition is concerned, I don't know how to respond to this, but in my view, Marxists have a very good reason to be concerned with this philosophical problem. And my view is this: Marxist tradition is characterized by two levels, in my view. One scientific level and one normative level, which has to do with political ambitions and all this stuff. And on the other, I consider myself as Marxist. So on the other hand, on the one hand, we have to say that we provide a scientific interpretation of the society, how it does work. And on the other hand, we have to say that socialism is better than capitalism. Genuinely better, normatively better. We need a genuinely normative real. So more than any other tradition, I think more than any other theoretical tradition, Marxists should face this problem, because they need to fulfill two desiderata. One desideratum is to describe scientifically society, and the other one is to make normative claims. And we cannot say that I like more socialism. I want to say that socialism is a genuinely progressive with regard to capitalism in the history of. And how those two desiderata can be accommodated. This is my view. And in the Marxist tradition, we have like, a pendulum. Some of the Marxists tend to the one pole of the pendulum, and some to the others. But we have to resolve the problem. That's my view.
More questions?
Hello, can you hear me? I thought I heard a contradiction in something that you.
Sorry.
Sorry, I thought I heard a contradiction in something that you said.
Okay.
I might.
I think you need to speak to the top.
I may be wrong.
Okay.
But I feel like I'm not.
Okay.
I thought I heard you say that the more we analyze nature through empirical lens, the more we understand nature to be only understood through the empirical. But then you said that in principle, access to this empirical God's eye view expands our rational possibilities, something like this. So how can both those be true? If in principle we're accessing empirical point of view, we're expanding our possibility of rationality, but actually the more we look at things through empirical points of view, the more we close off other points of view.
Okay, I have this one. So if I'm getting that correctly, my point is that by knowing more and more, in which cases I don't have control of my life, because I'm captured by dominant ideology or by my, I don't know, my classical Pavlovian classical condition, etc., etc. The more I become freer, and the more I become freer because I have the opportunity to be to restrict the possibility of normative error. So the point is that if I know more about the cases that I don't have control of my life, I'm getting more control of my life. Is that more clear? Okay. I didn't get what is the contradiction though?
You're getting more into this. You're proposing that empiricism is liberating us to see. Okay, in this case, more problems. We are seeing more. There are more possibilities, but actually, you're saying also that empiricism makes us see the world through an empiricist lens more and more. The more we look and try to explain the world through empiricism, the more we see the world in that lens, and the more we exclude other ways of looking at the world. So as we increase our possibility of seeing the world through an empirical lens, through different problems, different possibilities, the less we are seeing the world through non-empirical means. So yes, we are increasing our possibilities in one way, but we are reducing the other. So in some total, we're not actually increasing. So
okay, I see your point. I think that our difference then is that if I can interpret your view, is that I take it that freedom, it's a notion that allows for degrees. It's not, as Pippin says, it's not an either you have it or you don't capacity. If we reject the either you have it or you don't capacity, then there is no contradiction, in my view. But it is correct that if you want freedom like a categorical notion that it's like 0 and 1, I am free and I am not free, then what I have already said are contradictory. But in my view, we should reject this view, the either you have it or you don't capacity. And I think that this is a Marxian view that comes from Hegel.
I think, did I miss any question?
Yes, if I may.
Yeah.
Otherwise, then.
No, we have, actually, Sean, we still actually have 15 minutes left.
Okay, 15 seconds. I was wondering about the notion of normative explanation. I agree with you that we have to save the space of reasons from an all-embracing space of causes, which science will eliminate. And I just want to say that I think there are two ways to do that. The one is, like you said, to say that there is a domain of normative explanations that science cannot reach because they have this pattern that you learn more about yourself through incorporating scientific knowledge about your actions. And the second way, which I think is somehow is there in Sellars, for example, is to say that the space of reasons is irreducible to science, not by having irreducible kinds of explanations, which are normative explanations, but with the thought is that it does something else. It doesn't explain and describe the world. It expresses another kind of thinking about the world, another kind of intelligibility, as you say, but which is not in the business of explaining. That's just a variation. I'm putting it on the table just as another position, not as an objection.
Okay, I see your point. I understand that. I feel that a liberal naturalist conception should put closer the rational or normative domain with the explanatory domain of of empirical science. You know, my concern with those problems comes from the history of science. And then you have to explain phenomena that are wrong, scientific beliefs that are wrong, and scientific beliefs that are correct in the history of science. And then you see that they are too close. And then you have to say a few things about how the belief modification takes place. And this, I think, suits more in this particular case to make the history of science intelligent. But I agree with you that it's not an easy task to distinguish between the normative and the empirical scientific explanation. I mean, I present it here very easily, but I think that there is a lot of conceptual work to be done in order to provide a solid logical distinction between those two kinds of explanation. I can only take this. I take Anscombe's direction of fit to be a criterion of a demarcation criteria for the two kinds of explanations. I think that Anscombe's direction of fit is not only a demarcation criteria for practical and theoretical reason, it's a criterion, demarcation criteria for normative and non-normative attitude, in my view. But it needs a lot of work to do in order to provide a solid demarcation criteria for the for this logical distinction. Thank you.
I think who is the question?
Yeah.
Oh, we have Tom. No, that's you.
This is like, I hope this is a continuation of something that came up. So there is, I think there still is, I also still see a tension like between this idea that like you could take from the Feuerbach thesis. I think Rödel does that, where you just say you have to introduce like the first person practical perspective, like the practical reasoning perspective on things, in order to make materialism like work. And then like this idea when you look at how Engels and Marx, and Lenin, how they explain spontaneity and freedom, they end up saying we can be free in our agency by understanding the laws that govern us. And that's the point that you apparently made, that I heard you making. And I still, for one, don't understand this point. How can you be free from a law just by understanding that you are subject to it? Like Engels says, by understanding it, we can put the law to use, but putting the law to use is one step further on top of just understanding it. And he seems to introduce some, like, again, some mysterious, like, spontaneity of a subject there, which he shouldn't. But
I see your point. I totally see your point. But as I said before, okay, this is a reconceptualization of the notion of freedom too. If by free you mean that I'm not affected by a law at all, then my notion of freedom is not coherent, it's not consistent. But I don't think that this is a sustainable notion of freedom. If you are a Marxist, especially if you are a Marxist, that's my point. So what is the second best, if that was the first best solution, the second best or the best solution is to reconceptualize the conception of freedom in order to avoid eliminativism on the one hand, and to avoid, on the other hand, some kind of idealism or some nous or mind or spirit or whatever, guys, that it is not affected by the natural laws. I can imagine how a naturalist view could survive this premise.
I can imagine something. So
okay,
the alternative seems to be freedom is us being exempt from laws, and that doesn't make sense. That's like the mysterious metaphysical, like, I reject that too. Your alternative is freedom is to understand the laws that one is governed by. that doesn't make sense to me. I think the way to go is to look at this like society. So it's like us being social beings, that makes us free. And that's underemphasized in those accounts like that Lenin and Engels and Rödel give.
Yeah.
In the background, of
Okay.
course, but-
Yeah. I see. Okay. Yes, I see your point, but I think that if we take this road, in my view, we go to idealism. Something that is exempt from the
No.
so, and then we don't some kind of dualism emerges from this point. We have to to explain how this realm where we are free and we are exempted from laws is going together with the other realm. And I don't want that. That is why I take this road.
Just to add to that, it's not understanding the laws that makes us free in itself. It's understanding them as social human beings acting in a social way, in recognition, in understanding the laws. So it's not an abstract, passive understanding, but the action of the subjective,
Yeah, but
concrete, physical action in a social context.
the idea of acting seems to introduce freedom. Like
Exactly, yeah, it does. But the other question I had was,
And I want to stress this, so, excuse me, but we can use the term free or freedom with many senses. I speak of the most abstract metaphysical notion of freedom. Then there is political freedom. There are too many things. Okay, I'm not talking about this. The knowledge of the laws is not it's not a necessary and sufficient condition for all kinds of freedom. We need institution that makes this knowledge common for all people and all this stuff. There is a political analysis after that, but I'm talking only for the metaphysical level.
also, when you're talking about understanding laws, it's not that the laws are rigid and fixed and there for all time. It's if, for example, an example of real freedom of an artist who has training in certain kinds of creative creations, whether it's a sculpture or music, very strict rules when you compose music, but the artist creates new laws in the process of creation that weren't there before. So that's the freedom, isn't it? But I was wondering, Thodoris, I mean, I completely agree with what you said. The only things I would add that in today's world, the idea of an abstract force outside the God thing, that we can just be there and understand things is, it's actually been undermined totally and changed into the opposite extreme by a lot of scientists. For example, Carlo Rovelli, for example, very popular scientist, cosmologist, who would say there is no, overemphasis of the subjective, and that you cannot, that there is no reality except what we imagine, and that there's no way of really grasping an objective world outside of human perception and so on. I think that's very much more common now than the other point of view.
I think that eliminative naturalism, hard empiricist naturalism, and postmodernism, and the over appealing to subjectivity are the two faces of the same coin. Because if you are very, if you are scientists, scientism leaves a lot of room because science is an evolutionary enterprise. It's not like we know everything right now. We get know things, and this leaves room for many things that we don't know. And this gap is fulfilled by another extreme, which is that there is no such thing as material causes or something like that. There is only subjectivity, and this is the two faces of the same dominant ideology, in my view.
Hi, thank you very much. I want to press you a bit more on the issue of degrees of freedom that came up at various points during the Q&A,
Sure.
right?
Okay.
Because I think I'm still a bit like, not sure I'm fully following your position here. I'm sure I understand you. I want to make sure I'm getting this right. So if you look at the argument you have there on the slide, under 1, right? It seems like first premise, if the expression of our freedom are identified with the expression of our rationality, and second premise, if the expression of rationality are proportional to our knowledge of the causal order that dictates our life, it follows that we can only determine various degrees of freedom. And it seems to me like actually what follows from those premises is that we can only determine various degrees of expression of freedom, right? So what I'm trying to say here is that like, it seems to me that the argument only shows that once I have a capacity for self-determination, then this capacity can be exercised to various degrees. But you're not entirely off the hook because there's still a question of whether I have the capacity or not. So the problem of whether like there is some kind of distinction between an absolute state of freedom as opposed to, you know, in the constitutive sense, seems to be like not entirely diffused by the argument you have there, right? You see what I mean?
I know.
And I think someone
Yeah.
like McDowell is all about that, right? He thinks that there is this kind of leap from animal nature to self-determination and stuff like that. Then once you've made that leap, you have various degrees of realization of that capacity. You can exercise that capacity to respond to reason more or less. This is why we can get things wrong. But I still don't see how the idea of degrees of freedom there helps you out of that particular problem, right?
I totally see your point. You are referring to the transition problem. This is the problem that a naturalist poses against the normativist. How came and some we were like inorganic matter, and then we became rational beings. So how so we have to say a philosophical story of how we got this capacity. But I think that we don't have to respond to this transition problem. This is my view. We don't have to respond to this transitional problem. This is a fake problem. This is not a genuine problem. And my view is this: no one who is biologist should respond of how we have a biological phenomenon. No one feels the philosophical need to explain how from a physical world with planets and molecules and all this stuff, we have an organization of the matter that corresponds to the biological level. And hence, they can explain things in a biological way.
Can I have a short back?
This is a philosophy. Sorry?
Why isn't that a problem? It seems to me a big problem because it's like, I mean, someone like McDowell wants to say, okay, we go from this particular life form, animal life form, to the human life form, entirely different life form. We are completely transfigured by some kind of process, right? And you might think, okay, there's something quite strange about it, because if I tell you that there's a plant that becomes an animal, that surely requires some kind of explanation or something like that. So I don't see why you think that's not a problem at all once the, you know.
You don't, McDowell does not face the transitional problem at face value. He says something, in Mind and World, he says something like an evolutional story about language. And he says that it is the depository of human wisdom. And this is somehow the creator of the second nature. It is only a small sentence in the whole Mind and World. After Mind and World, he doesn't say anything about the transitional problem. He says that it's not a problem. I mean,
I think it's not a problem, but the question whether it is a problem or not, like, it's a different one.
Okay, so your claim is that I need a philosophical narrative of how human beings became capable of knowing the cases where they are subject to natural laws. I'm not sure I have this philosophical narrative, but I'm not sure that I need it in order to defend my view here. I think there are two distinct philosophical problems. I'm not saying that this is not a problem at all. It's legitimate. It is part of the contemporary dialogue about normativists and anti-normativists. I don't think that it is crucial for making this point.
On that note, I think we can take a break and we're on again at 4 o'clock. Okay, thank you. There's a funny footnote in My New World, which I've always been fascinated by.
Sorry.
There's a footnote
Okay.
in Mind and World, where it says something like the questions that arise in the context of human evolution are the closest a good question can come to the bad questions I'm trying to get rid of.
Yes, that's that. Yeah, sure. Yes, you are correct. I didn't remember that.
It's a very recording in progress.
And I guess I should share the
Oh, yeah.
presentation with the.
Oh. Here we go. Go back to this. So